This is a disaster. I do have to give credit though to whoever thought to use a piece of a truck axle for an expedient bucket pin, because that is pretty clever. But pretty much every part on this bucket linkage needs to be overhauled. I would like to fix this H-link so that I don't have to buy a new one because they're very expensive. The first thing I need to do is straighten it. If I set it down like this, you can see how it doesn't sit flat on the floor like it should. What I'm going to do is grind off this little feature right here to give myself more room to hopefully put it in the press, and then I can overpress it a little bit to account for the spring back and hopefully straighten it out like that. I am gonna switch gears here a little bit. My original plan after straightening this was to cut off these worn out pin bosses and weld on new ones. However, it has come to my attention that this is not cast steel like I thought it was. It's actually some kind of cast iron and thus not readily weldable. It could be welded, but it's a pain and I don't really trust myself to do it, so I'm just going to make a new one of these from scratch. I'm getting this thing ready to weld together. I did a few things off camera. For one, I remade this piece because the first one I made, I bored one end oversize and the bushing was not as tight as I thought it should be. And then I tried to fix it by dimpling the inside, which didn't really help. And then I tried to run a bead of weld around the outside to shrink the tube down, and that didn't help either. And then by the time I ground the weld off, I decided I should just go ahead and redo it, which I did out of some slightly thicker tubing because that's what I had. And happy with that. Those are nice and tight, so that should be fine. And then these I made too wide by accident. I just wasn't thinking about it, so that was no big deal. I just put them in the lathe and cut some off the ends. And then I also forgot these need grease circs in them. So I pushed the bushings back out, drilled them and tapped them for grease circs, and then put the bushings in and drilled through the bushing with a small carbide end mill, which worked great. After that, I cut out some 3/8 inch thick plate to act as the web and kind of lined it up and just tack welded it together so I could move it around as one piece. I was thinking of making this one piece and trying to bend it, but I just decided that getting the bend exactly right to match this curved profile would be too difficult, so I just kind of divided it up into approximately thirds, and I'm going to put it together like that. After quite a bit more fitting and fiddling, I finally have this thing exactly how I want it. As you can see, I've got a ratchet strap squeezing the ends together, and then I've got these C-clamps squeezing the sides together. So that should ensure that the pins are parallel to each other and square to the sides. And then I've got the pins resting on some of these serrated clamp block things, which are resting on this milling machine table, which should be pretty flat. So that should ensure that the pins are in the same plane. So then I'm going to go around and just tack everything together to hopefully keep it from moving, and then I'll weld it solid and it'll be done. Normally I wouldn't recommend welding near a machine tool like this, but this is just an old worn out piece of junk milling machine that I bought for next to nothing to do exactly this sort of thing with. Very happy with how this turned out. For some reason the sides, more so this side, pulled in on top and twisted these pin bosses down a little bit, but I was able to put the pins in one on either side and then kind of manipulate it a little bit in the press and twist them back good enough to get the pin all the way through. It's pretty stiff, but you can knock it in and out with a mallet, so that should be okay. Other than that, it's only warped a little bit. Maybe you can see here. I'm very careful. So that is perfectly adequate in my opinion. The next thing I want to work on is the end of the stick, and the first thing I want to do with that is replacing the bushings in this bore right here. There's one on each side. So what I've already done is put a couple globs of weld on it. That way I can slide this threaded rod through with this nut on the end of it that just fits inside the bushing, and it should be able to grab onto that weld and pull the bushing out. Huh. Well, that didn't work. Okay, this time I've welded the nut directly to the bushing, so let's see what happens now. There we go. I cut the remains of the bushing off on the lathe, so now I'm going to weld the nut back into this side and do the same thing. Alright, I got new bushings and I made a little thingamajig to help guide them while I pull them into the bore. I'm going to paint a little bit of anti-seize on this just to make a mess. The next thing I want to do is fix the end of this hydraulic cylinder. As you can see, it is quite worn out. So I'll take it off, bore it out, weld it up, bore it back out for some new bushings. But I think there's actually still part of an old bushing in there that I need to get out. I can't tell for sure if there's a bushing in there. It kind of looks like there is, but whatever it is really soft, so I'll just machine it out. almost got me. Came out pretty good. There's a couple little spots that didn't clean up, but it's better than I expected it to be. There was a grease fitting here, but it was all mangled up, so I just drilled it out and threaded it for a bolt and then welded the bolt in so I wouldn't have my weld interrupted. You don't actually need that grease fitting because this receives grease from the pin that goes through it, so actually I'm not sure why it was there to begin with, but anyway. That ought to do it. At this point, I'm going to turn my attention to this quick attach adapter. Bobcat calls this an exchange adapter. It's pretty much the same story. The pinholes are totally worn out, as you can see. These are extremely expensive to get new from Bobcat. I was going to try and fix it by boring the holes back out round and welding in pin bosses, but this is also cast iron and I can't really weld it. I'm kind of tempted to try because I can see over here where someone has welded it before, and obviously it lasted long enough to start wearing into the welded repaired area there. But I think with the amount of time and effort I would have into setting this up and boring it out and welding it correctly and everything and repairing this part that has already been repaired once, I think it will be easier and cheaper to just build one from scratch. So I paid a local fabrication shop to laser cut me some brackets out of 1-inch thick mild steel plate. They're kind of the same shape as the quick attach, so you can sort of see what I'm driving at here. I've got two of these, this one and this one over here, and then some other parts that I cut out myself, and I'm gonna fit this all up and weld it together and make my own adapter. I'm getting this mocked up on a bucket I dragged in here, kind of mostly figuring out where the pinholes need to go, which is challenging because there's not really any straight lines to measure anything off of. The only thing that is close is this surface right here. So I put the other bracket on there and put a pin through the hole on this side, and then put the square up there like that, and touched it to the pin, and then marked it, took that off, put these on, put it back, and I've got a line scribed here that you probably can't really see. So then I'll find where it needs to go up and down, and from that I can measure where this pivot pin needs to go. And then for this pin that actually holds the bucket onto the bracket, I took a piece of scrap steel and just turned it down and turned a kind of a dull point on it. Just stuck it in there and used it like a transfer punch, smacked it with a hammer and made a little divot in there so I know where to bore that hole. So now what I'll do is take both these off here, line them up very carefully, and just put some tack welds on the edges to hold them aligned. And then I can bore through both of them, and I know the holes will be in exactly the same spot. Then cut them back apart and weld everything up. This turned into a little bit of a debacle. So I messed these plates up because I bored this hole a little bit oversized, and then I tried to fix it by boring it more oversized and pressing in a sleeve, and that kind of worked, but I decided I wasn't happy with that. So then I tried to fix this one by welding it up and boring it back out, but I forgot I had the polarity reversed on the welder. And then by the time I figured that out, I had ruined the weld, and I was out of welding gas, and I was just really fed up with it. So I ordered 2 more plates, but I asked him to make a few changes on some of the dimensions, and then I don't know what happened, but he screwed those plates up. Yeah, they just weren't really usable. So I brought that up to him, and he said, sorry, I messed it up. I'll cut you some new ones like they're supposed to be, but I don't know when it will be because the laser's down. So I just told him, no problem, just let me know when you know something. And then about a week and a half later, he emailed me back and said they're ready. So I went and got them. I got them bored out. Looks really good. I'm very happy with that. So I've got 2 pivot holes, and then the hole for the pin to retain the bucket. And then I also drilled and tapped some holes here for pin retainers, which I'll show you later. And I also made this out of a chunk of 2x2 solid steel bar, which I bored out, and that'll go kind of like something like that. And then I did mill a little bit off the top of it, which I thought I had to do. I didn't actually need to do that, but it doesn't matter. So I am going to get this all fixtured and clamped together how I want it and ready to weld, and I'll bring you back. This laser cut plate is a little bit tricky to work with because the cut edge is not 90 degrees to the face, because there's a kerf with a slight angle, so you can't just like clamp it down to a flat surface on the cut edge, because then it'll be sitting at an angle, so you got to work around it. So I've got this block in the end here and a clamp to clamp the sides down and squeeze it onto that. And then on this end, I did basically the same thing with the H-link. Stuck a couple feeler gauges in there for shims because this is just a little bit narrower than this is. And then in the middle, I just ran a little piece of threaded rod through just to kind of give it a little bit more rigidity. And down here, I've got this piece clamped like that on both sides. So hopefully this will not warp too bad. Pins are just in there kind of loose right now, so we'll see how bad they are once I weld it. This is all done, came out really good, I'm very happy with it. I, off camera, went around and just welded this bottom plate to the side plates like that and then ground the weld down. More than anything just to seal that up because there was a bit of a gap there I didn't want dirt and whatnot to get into. I did have a couple of issues. For one, the pin that was in this bore got stuck and I pressed it out and it galled pretty bad on a couple spots and kind of messed up the bore on this side a little bit. Well, actually on the other side too, but not as bad. I just smoothed it out with a die grinder, and I mean the pin fits, so I guess it's not really a big deal. I don't think that'll actually affect anything overall. I'm just going to run it like that. I'm certainly not going to try to redo anything. I guess if I really wanted to, I could try to weld that back up and either grind it down or bore it back out, but it's not worth it to me. I'm just going to use it as is. I think it'll be fine. The other issue I had, and I know I've talked about this before, but it never ceases to amaze me how much stuff moves when you weld it, no matter how big it is. The sides of this squeezed in about, I think about 40 thousandths of an inch, if I remember what the measurements are correctly. The end of the H-link here was about, I think 10 thousandths oversized, 10 thousandths too wide to fit in here. So I just took this little 10-ton Porta-Power ram and stuck it in between here and spread it open. And I pumped it up as hard as I could, and it fits in there now, but when you put the pin in, it's still kind of stiff for some reason. Like without the pin, it fits freely, and then with the pin, it binds up just a little bit. So I think I'm just going to try to run it like that, and hopefully as long as I keep it well greased, it won't like gall on me or anything bad. I don't think there's enough pressure for that to happen. In hindsight, I don't know why I made this as wide as I did. It didn't need to be that wide. I should have made it a little bit narrower and then taken up the gap with shims, but for some reason that I can't remember, I didn't do that. Anyway, the only other thing I'm going to do is take some of these washers and stick them on there like that with some RTV silicone so the pin boss on the excavator doesn't wear into them. And I think this thing is ready to install. Here's what it looks like on a bucket. Fits pretty good. I did have to grind down these surfaces right here on the plates, they were just a little bit too tall to fit in there, but now it just slides right in like that. And there is a little bit of wiggle room on this end, which I might try to shim up, might try to weld a piece of sheet metal to the bucket here to take up that slack, but honestly, it's probably fine how it is, really. I did end up swapping out this bucket. This is the one I was using before, and I swapped it out for this one because this one, the bore for this pin is crooked. Hopefully I can show you here. If I take this piece of metal that just fits on this side and then slide it over to this side, you can see there's a pretty decent gap there. I ended up having to remake this part here because I made the first one based off of this bucket, and then it didn't fit right, and I was trying to figure out why, and it took me a long time to notice that that bore was crooked on there. So then I checked the other two buckets I had, and they were both straight, or a lot straighter than that one anyway. Last but not least, I want to replace this worn out pin boss. As you can see, the bore is quite oval shaped. You could theoretically line bore this and get it back round, but I think it will be quite a bit cheaper and easier to just cut it off and weld on a new one. I got this all cleaned up. That was just a whole bunch of tedious grinding that wasn't very interesting, so I didn't film it. That's what the inside of a Bobcat 334 boom looks like, if you ever wondered. I also made a new pin boss. Took a piece of round stock and bored it out on the lathe and pressed some bushings into it, and also added a grease fitting like the other one had. So that will fit in here kind of like that. The fit is pretty okay. Definitely some gaps that I'll have to fill. Especially, yeah, right there. I went overboard with the grinder. But I don't think that'll cause any major issues. So the other thing I did is made this janky jig out of some scrap metal, and the idea there is to put this pin in this hole, and then that will hold this pin in alignment with it and keep everything where it needs to be. Because obviously if you just stuck the pin boss in here and welded it up, it would be totally crooked and no good at all. But anyway, I'm gonna swing this back over towards the garage, and I guess I'll get everything lined up and then just very carefully go around and tack it as much as I can, and then burn it in, as they say. This is what the jig looks like when it is installed. And you can kind of see how the boom looks crooked compared to the pin boss. which is why you wouldn't want to just go off the boom, because then you'd end up with the pin boss being crooked to the one behind it. But I think that is going to work perfectly, so I'm going to start welding on this. I'm extremely happy with how that turned out. As far as I can tell, this bore is exactly parallel with this bore, at least to the best of my measurement abilities, so I can't ask for better than that. So I'm going to glue some washers onto the thrust faces here, like I did with the quick attach, and I think I'm ready to reassemble this. I lied, I can't actually put it together yet because I forgot. I need to do some work to the thumb. The pin bosses are both bent. As you can see, this pin is angled up. It doesn't line up with the hole in this one, and if you flip it around the other way like that, it's the same thing. It's going up like that. So I've got it in the press here, and I'm going to try to just mash it back down so they will somewhat line up and I can get the pin through them. also need to cut a little bit off of each one of the pin bosses so that the thumb will fit around the new quick attach adapter because it's a little bit wider. I'm going to see if I can cut these off without breaking anything. I got this all put back together. That went pretty well. I did run into one issue with whatever this part is called. I think it's called a dog bone, but I bought this aftermarket. The pins on it were about 1/1000th of an inch larger than nominal, and the bores and all these bushings here were about 1 or 2 thousandths under nominal. So what I ended up doing to make that fit was just taking a dingle ball hone in a drill. Well, actually the hone wasn't aggressive enough, so I actually wrapped the hone with a piece of sandpaper and then just sanded out the insides of the bushings until the pin would slide through. Probably not the best way to do that, but it did work, so whatever. And I had one other little issue right here where at full curl this surface here swings up and actually was contacting this right here on both sides, so I just took it back off and ground about 1/8 of an inch off of that, and now it's got plenty of room. But yeah, I think this is going to work really good. I made some pin retainers out of some split shaft locking collars, and then I just welded a tab onto one side of them, and then I put them on with some shoulder bolts. So that should keep the pins from sliding or rotating or anything. And that's why I had to cut some off the thumb here to squeeze that locking collar in between it. Same thing on this side. See there, and then right here I've got those two washers sandwiched together so that hopefully they will wear down instead of the face of the pin boss or the coupler. I wish I had done that right here. I don't know why I didn't. But there shouldn't ever be much thrust force on the H-link here, so it shouldn't really matter anyway. But I'm going to toss that bucket on it, and actually already dug a little hole over there. I couldn't help myself, I wanted to try it out, but I will dig a little bit more and show you how it works. much wraps this up. I did want to talk briefly about the economics of it, because it turns out I think I'm kind of an idiot. Of course, after having done all that, I went back and checked, and basically, if you want to get all those parts from Bobcat, being the exchange adapter, the H-link, and the dog bone, or whatever it's called, those three things would be about $4,000 for Bobcat OEM parts. If you want to go aftermarket, which they are all available aftermarket, it would be about half that, probably about $2,000 figure. I'm not sure what it, like shipping and tax and everything, but about that much. And I just looked, I kept track. I have about $1,300 worth of parts and material in what I made. Now, I did buy an aftermarket dog bone, which was $300, and I did waste $200 getting those plates remade. So if you wanted to pinch your pennies even harder, you could do it a little bit cheaper than that, but the amount of work that took was absolutely not worth it. I would have been way better off to just buy aftermarket parts, and then I still would have had to fix the stick and the worn out hydraulic cylinder, but the point is I would have been way better off not making my own parts. And actually, now that I mentioned the boom, I replaced that myself. I have no idea how much like a welder or somebody would charge to do that. I think if you got it line board, I would probably expect to pay at least $1,000 minimum, especially because the way Bobcat has those set up it's kind of difficult to line bore. It's got like a counter bore, or I think 2 counter bores in it that most people probably aren't going to want to mess with. And of course, you'd have to deal with the worn out hydraulic cylinder rod, either fix it, get somebody else to fix it, or just replace the whole rod. You can get that from Bobcat. I'm not sure how much it is, but doesn't matter. It runs, it drives, it digs, so that's very exciting. Super happy about that. I am going to go to the store and get some black spray paint to put on that so it doesn't get all rusty. And thank you for watching. I just remembered I have this other half of the bucket pin boss that I cut off, and you can see that counterbore business I was talking about, how it's got like 2 steps on it that you would have to cut in if you were getting a line board to use the Bobcat OEM parts. But you can see how badly hammered that thing was from running that undersized pin as it walked back and forth and just beat it out like that. See how it cracked this bushing all up.